I'd like to introduce you to one of my favorite insects. Does anyone recognize it? This is a fly from the family Ceratopogonidae. Now does anyone recognize it? All right, so you may recognize these more as midges, sandflies, or no-see-ums, depending on where you're from. And you've probably had a lot of experiences with them, and you probably hate them. They bite, they get through mosquito screens, and they're generally incredibly annoying. So then the question is there a reason I like them, or am I just crazy? Could be both. The truth is, I love these because I love chocolate. I know that doesn't make any sense. That's like saying, I love elephants because I love eating apple pie. But there is a connection. We wouldn't have cocoa, the key ingredient in chocolate, without the fruits of the cacao tree. But that's not where the story begins. It starts with a little flower. Now, this little flower looks normal enough, but most pollinators can't actually pollinate this flower. And cacao trees are what we call self-incompatible. What that means is that pollen from this flower can't actually pollinate any of the flowers from the same tree. What it needs is a pollinator to take pollen from a different tree and bring it to this flower in order to produce fruit. Without that fruit, we can't get cocoa, and without cocoa, there's no chocolate. When most people think of pollinators, they think of bees. And bees pollinate a lot of crops, but not these. The reason is these flowers are very small. So if a large bee were to try to go and try to access the nectar and pollen, it couldn't actually get there to access it. What's needed are little tiny flies from the family Ceratopogonidae, the same one that I showed you earlier. Does that change your image of them at all? Now let me talk a little bit about their life cycle. Midges, as larvae, reproduce in rotting or decomposing organic matter, like fruit that falls at the bottom of the tree. Once these little midges become adults, they fly up to the tops of the trees and start feeding, presumably on nectar in some of these flowers. As they do that, they're a little bit of a messy eater, and they'll get a little bit of pollen on their face, maybe on their hairy back. Don't judge them. So then what they do is they take that pollen and they go to the next tree, and then some of that pollen then rubs up on the next flower. And because of that, a pollination event happens. Now, as it's flying around from flower to flower, it may bump into a person. And as it does that, it may give it a little bit of a bite. It does this for protein. Once it's got enough protein, then it will go down and lay more eggs in the decomposing fruit at the bottom of the tree, and that will allow the cycle to continue. But in a working cacao farm that produces cocoa, we don't leave fruit rotting around at the base of the tree, because that's literally letting your profits rot. So that means that there's no midge habitat. It's a bit like setting up bird feeders around your house to watch birds come, but then always removing their nests. It just doesn't work. So then what do we do? To answer that question, let's think about how cocoa is actually removed from the cacao tree. When we pick a fruit, a cacao fruit, we remove the beans from the fruit for harvesting, and what's left over is the husk that surrounds these beans. And we normally put them in a big pile somewhere on the farm or remove them from the site. But what if we took those leftover husks and then reintroduced them back into the farm to allow the midges to reproduce then? It turns out that a study in Africa found that by doing exactly that, you can actually increase the pollination rates. And so we've been working with local farmers in Australia to do exactly that. And so far, the results have been very encouraging. So then the next step is to see which midges are actually breeding there. So you can walk through a cacao farm and look for little tiny midges flying around. And if you've got good enough eyesight, that'll work. But a more effective way is to literally vacuum them out of the air. So that's what we do. We take these specialized vacuums and we can literally vacuum midges straight out of the air. And midges vary both in their ability to pollinate cacao as well as their propensity to bite you or I. So the key is to figure out which midges are breeding where and try to increase their abundances, potentially through these husks. Now, it's not just because we can't sell rotten fruit that we don't leave rotting fruit lying around in a farm. It might break potentially the first rule of farming, and that's because rotting fruit has a tendency to attract pests. Now, to deal with these potential increase in pests, we could spray pesticides, and insecticides will likely kill some of these pests. The problem is we need to be very careful about the midges. We need to be very careful that these insecticides don't actually kill the midges. In contrast, we could potentially find other animals on the farm that will eat those pests for us. And this could potentially allow the midges to survive. Fortunately, in tropical cocoa systems, we have some very big predators. And these predators can be really good at attacking all sorts of insects, even the odd graduate student or two. So then the question is, what do these husks do to the predators? Do they alter them at all? And what we've found is that it's not just midges that reproduce in these decomposing cacao husks, but all sorts of insects and other related organisms that we call detritivores are actually reproducing in these. And as they increase in abundance, they may fly around, and these predators may actually feed on them. Once they feed on them, that gives them alternative food that can increase the densities of these predators that then they may provide better control of our pests. As we started going through cacao farms, we started finding even more species than we may have otherwise predicted. There's a diverse group of predators that are strolling around in cacao trees looking for pests and prey. We've seen praying mantises, we've seen lizards, lady beetles, ants, spiders, even spiders that look like ants, the best of both worlds. So if we can take these diverse group of predators and harness the power of these predators, we may actually be able to control these pests. In fact, the predators may actually benefit the midges. So in this photo, we've got a green ant mimic spider. So this is a spider that mimics green ants that's then caught a green ant in its web. And if you look closely, you'll see a midge that's actually feeding on the green ant while the spider feasts. So now this is a midge that doesn't have to bite you or I for protein. It's getting it directly from this ant. So now that midge is full, it can lay more eggs to produce more pollinators, to produce more fruit that then can lead to more chocolate. So this is the best case scenario. So we need to rethink of the way we think about farming. And normally we would think this is a beautiful farm, and it is really pretty. This is a farm that we started working on before they started adding in the husks. And it's pretty, but you'll notice two things that are missing. There's not a lot of biodiversity, and there's not a lot of fruit. So what we need to start thinking about when we think about a pretty farm is something like this, a farm that's teeming with biodiversity. And that biodiversity may actually lead to more chocolate. That's the ultimate goal. I, for one, would love more chocolate. So the next time your son or daughter is eating chocolate birthday cake and just really enjoying it, make sure they appreciate the midges. Thank you.